I'm Sequoia from Teen Press at Ashland High.
And I'm Jade Bromley, and we're here with Katherine Dieckmann.
To talk about strange weather.
Strange weather.
And your profession, just
Yes.
in general.
And my so-called profession. Okay.
So why don't you give us a little summary of strange weather? We haven't seen it.
Okay. Strange Weather, which is actually playing on the other side of this camera as we speak, is a film about a woman who has, played by Holly Hunter, who has experienced a great loss in her life which she hasn't recovered from, and goes on the road with her best friend, kind of on a quest for vengeance, thinking she's going to solve the question of her grief, and then realizes, of course, there is no answer to grief. There's no one answer to grief. That's what the movie's about.
Awesome.
And it was shot all in the state of Mississippi.
So I was doing some research on that movie, and was noticing that you have this very female central plot, and it's all about her journey as a woman and what that's like to go through grief. And I also noticed that you had quite a female heavy crew. Was that on purpose, this kind of female central, this journey altogether in the filming of and the plot of the movie?
Well, the story was born of experiences that friends of mine have had who've lost children to suicide, but I also really wanted to make a film about an unconventional woman in her 50s. I think movies usually show women in their 50s as alcoholic or desperate or depressed or, and they don't really reflect women that I know. And so I wanted to write a woman that I know who's kind of complicated and still smokes a cigarette and still goes to a bar and drinks a drink and still has sex and is still in the world and isn't an AARP card carrying, person in a fleece thing with gray hair. So part of it was just to show this female character that you don't usually see, and that was certainly important to me in the storytelling, and also that the film really focuses on her friendship with her best friend, who's played by Carrie Coon, wonderful actress who's on The Leftovers and is about to be on Fargo, played Ben Affleck's sister in Gone Girl. And Carrie, is quite a bit younger than Holly, really almost maybe 20 years younger than Holly. And I like showing that there can be a best friendship between two women who are such radically different ages, and it's never discussed, it's just a given in the story. So that was also important to me, that they were different ages and yet could still be best friends across that generational divide. And then, I happened to connect with these two female producers who had produced my last film, Motherhood, that I made with Uma Thurman, Janet Edelbaum and Rachel Cohen, and they came on to this project, and they already knew me and we'd already worked together, so that's how I had female producers. But they also felt passionately about the material for the reasons that I did, and were very tenacious in getting it financed. And then, I wound up hiring a great female first AD, which is not so common. I had a female editor. My composer was a woman. So I don't know, it just sort of turned out. It wasn't like I actively went, okay, I'm gonna make a movie that's about women, made by women. It just sort of turned out that way.
It's probably more real like that, though, to have all that female perspective in your film.
It is, and it's great to have female energy on a set. I mean, I had a male DP, and I had probably the best relationship with him of almost any. I've also worked with male DPs almost always, and I've also had great relationships with my male cinematographers, and he and I had a completely symbiotic, emotional, completely connected, like I would with any woman. I mean, he definitely was in touch with his female aspect and made the actors really comfortable because he was so available kind of to them emotionally. So I don't really draw any rigid gender lines that way, you know what I mean? Because I think men can sometimes be more involved than women emotionally. Not always, sometimes. But it was really nice to have such a strong, and certainly for Holly and Carrie as my actors, we talked a lot about their circumstances as women working in the movie business and ageism and the kinds of roles they get offered. And Carrie Coon, in fact, had turned down every movie role she'd been offered between Gone Girl and my movie because she just thought the women were written in the most ridiculous way. She's like, why would I do that? I can do TV where I get interesting parts to play, but I'm not going to do movies where I'm playing the girlfriend or this or the super, she's just totally not interested in that. So women are looking for great roles like that in movies. It's hard to find them though. It's actually much easier to find interesting roles in TV at this point, I think, than in movies. But
along those lines, you've worked with a few really big names Minnie Driver and Paul Rudd and Uma Thurman, which I think is really amazing. And I'm just wondering, observable difference between like a really big name from Hollywood working on an independent production as opposed to working on like a big budget production?
I don't think so, because I think an actor is an actor is an actor. And before I was a filmmaker, I was a journalist, and I interviewed tons of celebrities. I mean, just tons of celebrities. I did celebrity interviews for Rolling Stone and Vogue and all these magazines. And so I think by the time I started making movies, I was very, I don't know what the word is, just like not unintimidated by, but I just realized that famous people are just like anybody else. And I spent a lot of time in my 20s being very close friends with the lead singer of R.E.M., Michael Stipe, who was the one who gave me music video to direct, which is how I started directing. And so I spent a lot of time around, a famous rock band. It's just like, if you do that, you just kind of realize people are people, and people get thrust into positions of power, but that doesn't mean that it changes who they are. I mean, when Paul Rudd was working on Diggers with me, and we were struggling because we actually had Peter Dinklage, now very famous from Game of Thrones, but then not very well known because it's like made a long time ago. He dropped out of our movie like 2 weeks before we were shooting, and I remember just sitting on the floor with Paul Rudd, like bouncing actor ideas around. He was just like, okay, who about this guy? Let's figure out this problem together. Actors, once they commit to a movie, they just want to make it the best movie that they can, and they're not really egotistical, I find, about being stars or whatever. It's just, and they understand if they're doing a low budget indie movie, they're not going to have a big fancy trailer, and it's going to be kind of scrappy, and it's going to be, we're all in it together, but they do it because they like the material, and want to do it.
Have you, so I know you worked a lot in like the southern states, and there's kind of like a very interesting subculture type thing going on there.
Sure.
Have you noticed either any huge differences or learned anything about how women live there?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm not a southerner. I'm from New York. I live in New York City. I'm from upstate New York originally. But when I became friends with R.E.M., as I mentioned earlier, I started going to Athens, Georgia a lot when I was like in my mid-20s. And I made very close friendships with women there who I am still close to today. And actually, my best girlfriend in college was Southerner, also from Alabama. And so I spent a lot of time with Southern women over the years, listening to the way they talk. And the way they talk is very different from the way Northern women talk. Like, there's just certain expressions they say all the time, like, he was on my last nerve, or he was sitting on top of me, he was working my last nerve, or like, and I would also just write down the things that they said to me casually in conversation and for years, and just kind of listen to the dialogue and the rhythm of the dialogue. And so it was really easy for me to write Strange Weather because I just spent so much time with those kinds of women. It was like effortless, actually. I did give the script to a number of my Southern friends and have them read it and say, like, is there something I've gotten wrong, like language-wise or rhythm-wise? And they're all like, no. It's like Southern could have written it. That's how. So that was really easy. I feel very comfortable in the South. And yeah, 2 of my 4 features were made in the South. And I love the South, and I think the South is often underrated as a place. I mean, obviously, it has a very complicated legacy, especially Mississippi and working in Mississippi, which is why I've made a point to have a strong sort of secondary black character. Carrie Coon's girlfriend is played by a black actor, and Dream Ward Hammond, who's fantastic. But I think like there's a tendency to treat the South in a very caricatured way, in a very condescending way, and I really take issue with that. I think it's a rich and complicated and interesting place, and it was very important to me that none of the characters are looked down on in any way, So
That's good. I also, when looking through your movies that you've done, I noticed that 3 of them included like children as a main or part of the main.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I don't know why that is.
Do you think that that's like either reflects on your life, or have you used your own kids as inspiration? Or
Well, my daughter's been in 2 of my movies.
oh yeah.
My son's sort of uninterested in all that stuff, but my daughter was a baby when I made A Good Baby, my first film, and she's just an extra, like on a woman's arm. And see, I shot it with her, and without her, I was like, I'm cutting her if she doesn't keep continuity. I was ruthless. She was like 9 months old. She's on the cutting room floor. She can't do it, but she did it. And then she had a small speaking part in Digger. She played Ken Marino and Sarah Paulson's daughter. She got to say fucking nuts, and she was like 8, so that was like a real highlight for her being, being an 8-year-old. You can say fucking nuts. And plus, she got to ride in the van with Paul Rudd, and he would always tease her and give her Tootsie Pops and stuff, and that was fun for her. But I don't know. I don't think it's conscious on my part at all. The script I've just written that I'm going to try to shoot probably next summer doesn't have any children in it at all. In fact, it has an absence of a child in it. But I think when you're writing, Good Baby certainly. I mean, I adapted a novel, so that was the novel. Was a Good Baby, and it was about a man finding a baby, and it was really about him finding his feminine aspect or his deeper self, through this experience with this baby. So that wasn't so much about women and children. And motherhood was, obviously. Diggers not at all, but I didn't write Diggers. I just directed it. I didn't write it. So
That's interesting though, because I was reading that your motherhood set had a lot of just like, and also Strange Weather, these breaking stereotypes of what is feminine and what is normal and what is correct. And I also, it's important to me that we break stereotypes with men and saying that men have to be this particular thing.
That's right.
Very masculine, not motherly or, not paternal in general. Was that kind of your intention as well with A Good Baby?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I was really interested in that idea, and the actor who played that part, Henry Thomas, who was in his late 20s at the time, but he's well known as the boy who was in E.T. He was the lead in E.T. He's a wonderful actor. He was really interested in that idea also, and really available to that idea, and we had a great collaboration on that film. It was fantastic. But like even in Strange Weather, Kim Coates, who's male, Kim Coates, who was on Sons of Anarchy, as Holly and I would always say, he plays the chick part in this movie. He's the chick. He's barely in it, he's like kind of off to the side, and the central relationship is the friendship between Holly Hunter and Carrie Coon. And he's almost like, I won't say an afterthought because I think he's an important part of the movie, but he was never going to be a central, huge part of it.
It's like a reversal bromance where you've got the two guys. And
Right, exactly.
On the side.
Exactly. And, and also he looks like, Kim Coates looks like he could kill somebody like in a knife fight, immediately. And yet he plays a very kind of gentle, loving, embracing, accepting man, who's put up with a lot from the woman he's with and loves her and will put up with more from her, and but he looks like such a badass. And I like that too, that he just had this appearance, but he's a completely different kind of person. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I saw in an interview that you said that you were a Virgo.
I am a Virgo.
Does that do?
I'm a half German Virgo, which is even worse.
I heard, yeah. Do you does astrology take like a big part in your movies?
No, not at all. I actually was very skeptical about, even my husband was extremely skeptical when I kept saying, well, that's just because I'm a Virgo, but then he started reading like horoscopes, and they were so uncannily accurate. And I had a friend did my chart when I turned 40 as a gift, and it was like spooky. It was spooky. I mean, it was like down to like loves to ride a bicycle in the country. I mean, it was like very detailed, and it was absolutely so. Yeah, I don't know about other signs, but I do know that, and I have a lot of very close Virgo friends also, and it is a thing being a Virgo. Virgos are very concentrated and organized, and Virgos like that in each other. But Virgos can't really be with Virgos.
Yeah, I'm a Taurus, and everyone knows. They're like, oh, yeah, you're a Taurus.
Taurus, right?
Like,
my son's a Taurus.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't really think about astrology much, but I do think it applies in certain ways.
So you don't like think about astrology, but do you think that like you ever would, like when you're designing a character, do you ever like look at their personality and kind of like see like some characteristics that you notice in like other people, like generally?
Oh sure, yeah. Leaving astrology aside, absolutely. I mean, when I write characters, I base them usually at least in part on somebody I know. For behavior, for speech, for I mean, Holly's character is a combination of a bunch of different people that I know. And I guess Carrie's too, although I don't know if I had anybody specifically in mind for Carrie. But if I'm having, and I teach screenwriting at Columbia University, so when I'm working with my students on, if they're having a hard time getting a character to feel real on the page, I always say, like, who's the person you see? How do they walk? How do they behave? What would they do in X, Y, or Z situation to help them figure out, like, who the character is and write the character in a realistic inhabited way. I always say to my students, like, be an actor in your own scene when you're writing. And how would you act it? What would you draw on? Because if it's not inhabited, it's not going to be a good performance, and it's not going to be good on the page as a writer. But both those things are true.
Definitely. So you're a screenwriter, which I thought was so cool. When I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get to talk to a screenwriter.
But
You're also a director, which I think is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You've also written and directed on the same feature, and I'm wondering, does that ever conflict with each other? Do you ever have something that you've written and the way that you see it doesn't really translate onto the screen, or vice versa?
Oh, I write as a director, so I think when I'm writing, I'm always thinking about directing it. But when I cast it, and when you go get locations and you start working with your team, things always change, based on that. And I'm always willing to change the script if an actor says, I don't feel like my character would ever say that line. I'm not going to go, well, I wrote it. You have to say it. It's like a fluid process of what works. I mean, it's funny with Holly Hunter. I was more willing to rewrite my own script than she was. She's like, no, man, I like the way you wrote it. That's what I want to do. I don't want to change it. I think she improvised maybe 3 times in the whole movie, and some of that I used, but mostly she really wanted to be on book, and she liked the script and she liked the words. But some people, it just depends, But I'm always willing as a director to kill the writer, and in the editing room especially, to kill the writer. I mean, I'll always pull anything that I think doesn't work, even if I'm in love with the way I wrote it. It's doesn't matter. If it doesn't work, it goes, And I cut a lot out of Strange Weather. It was 2.5 hours in the first assembly, now it's 90 minutes. So an hour went, and I kept cutting it. Actually, I screened it we premiered at the Toronto Film Festival last September, and I was watching it, and I'm like, man, that should go, that should go, that should go, and I cut 7 minutes out of it after it premiered. And I think that's the cut that's playing right now, and I think it's a much better cut. You just have to keep looking at it and going is that the best version of the film that you can make? And until they pry it from your hands, you keep fussing with it, which I think is pretty normal.
And that must be a lot more easy to be able to just cut something if you don't if somebody else had written the script, would you have to consult them before you?
Yeah, not really. Once a writer gives a script over to a director, they don't really have much control over it. I mean, it depends on what the collaboration is. When I did Diggers, the guy who wrote it also acted in Ken Marino and also was a producer on it, and that was really hard because he was very invested in the script, and I didn't have as much leeway as a director to change things or to do things the way I wanted because he was producing it and acting in it, and that was a little bit difficult. Plus, it was all guys, and I was a woman directing all guys, so that was, sometimes challenging, but happy. I mean, I think I was really happy with that film. So
I'm interested what you think the difference, the most significant differences are between screenwriting and other forms of writing.
Well, screenwriting is really about the dialogue and just behavior, description on the page. Sometimes people write these long, really flowery descriptions of things. I'm like, that's never going to get on a screen. What you're trying to do is you're writing almost like a architectural blueprint for what the movie's going to be. So it's about what do you hear and what do you see. And when my students do things and she is the smartest person in the room, because I'm like, what, is there a footnote on screen? How do we know that? Either you're going to put it in behavior or into speech. And if it's not in behavior and speech, it's invisible, And I think it takes a long time to learn that because we're so used to novels, and when you write fiction, you can describe, and you can do anything, and it's not literal. But when you're writing a script, whatever you're writing is going to be on a screen, and it's going to be real in terms of what's real on the screen. It's going to be an image that's going to be real in time and space, and so that's a very different. It's a very different discipline than other forms of writing. I really love writing scripts. I mean, I love the form because I love photography and I love images and I love acting and performance, and so that's what really a screenplay is. It's helping someone see the world and for actors to be able to know what they're going to play. And I've learned a lot about screenwriting from working with actors. A lot. About what works, what doesn't work, what makes them feel cramped, what makes them feel excited, in the writing.
Because you didn't go to school for screenwriting.
I didn't. I went to Vassar undergrad and got a bachelor's in English literature, and then I went to NYU and have an MA in English literature. So I know writing really well, but I never went to film school. I learned on my feet because like I said before, I befriended REM, and then I my first thing I directed was a music video for Ariam. So I just learned on the set through public humiliation, basically.
My mother would like to know which video.
Stand was my first video. I know, it's so funny. Like Ariam now is like the geezer. It's like really funny to watch it like become like it's the parents' band, but it is the parents' band. No, I know, but you know, it's like an oldies act at this point. It's kind of funny. But I knew them when they were not an oldies act, when they're just starting out. Yeah, I did stand for them, and then that was great because that led to me doing music videos for other bands, and I kind of learned to direct just by doing it. Yeah.
You talked about music in an interview. You said that you drew influence from Lucinda Williams. I was interested, do you often do that? Translate music and just like
for sure. Yeah, for sure. Like when I did Good Baby, my first film, that script was really influenced by Appalachian murder ballads, you know, like 19th century and earlier murder ballads, which I listened to a lot when I was writing it because it was a very fable-like story about, you know, a guy gets and there's like tons of songs about this, like an older man gets a younger woman pregnant, then he murders her, that he's full of regret, and all set in the mountains and stuff, and that's where I was making that movie, and so I listened to that stuff a lot, like traditional music, and the score for that film was very influenced by sort of traditional murder ballads and stuff like that. And with Strange Weather, I listened to a lot of Lucinda Williams because she has a lot of songs about suicide, death, like that part of the South, like Pontchartrain, you know, which Holly Hunter's character crosses at the end, all those references. But I didn't really, and I know people who know her, and I actually had her email, and I could have written to her and approached her about doing the score, but I hired this woman, Sharon Van Etten, who I had listened to relentlessly for years. She's amazing. Because I didn't want it to be quite so on the nose, like to have the music that is that part of the world. You know, I wanted something that felt a little bit different. And she'd never scored a movie, and she just did an amazing job scoring it. And we use a lot of her songs in the movie. She's on the OA, if you watch the OA.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she sings in the OA. What's her character's name? She's one of the ones in the pod, you know, like the trapped people. Have you watched the OA?
I've watched a few episodes.
Yeah, she's in the third episode, especially since it's in the third episode. Anyway, she's a really interesting person.
Cool.
What's the I'm curious, what's the like symbolism behind the weather in Australia?
Well, you know, like I said, I have a lot of friends in the South, and they would tell me about sneaking out at night to water their gardens because of drought restrictions, and then like one part of the South would be in drought and another part would be completely flooding at the same time. And so that was sort of my context for the story, was like that someone was going to move from drought into flood and back out again. But that also, obviously, Strange Weather refers to her interior state, which is turbulent, you know, and storms are coming in and out for her. And so I like the idea of the internal and external worlds being kind of wedded in that title.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I feel like sometimes in movies people shy away from that. Like, that life is really good messy, and it's just like, I like to see that in movies.
Well, people also like titles that are really on the nose, and like everybody else asks me about the title, and I'm like, isn't it kind of obvious? I feel like it's obvious, but you know, it's not that obvious.
Well, I'm sure it's more obvious once you've seen it.
No, it's true. But no. But even people who see it ask me about like, why did I title it Strange Weather? I'm like, and then when I explain, they're just kind of nodding their heads. But you know, I mean, I could have called it like Out for Vengeance or something, and that would have been, you know, that would be the straight to DVD version.
I doubt that would accurately depict what she was going.
No, it would be very like on the nose and kind of, and it's about a lot of other things besides that, you know. So.
I can look at the movie for other questions.
I'm listening to Sharon's great score right now coming through. This
Yeah,
is like a
it's
track
good.
she sent me on her iPhone, and I'm like, it was like a rough demo. I'm like, can we just use it? She's like, yeah, sure, just use it. and it's so beautiful because it's like really raw, and she was just doing it by herself in her room. I love doing stuff like that.
I stayed up so late doing research
Oh
on it.
my gosh, you didn't have to.
I got really curious because yesterday I got the opportunity to speak to a couple different filmmakers, and they all have such different interesting perspectives, and you've got like actors versus like producer versus director, and like all those different components. And I'm a writer, and I've been looking into screenwriting, so when I saw that you were a screenwriter, I got really excited, and so I just kept going down the rabbit hole. But I'm actually kind of interested how you got connected with Ashland Independent Film Festival.
Oh, well, the curator here, Richard Herskowitz, I will say his name wrong. I've known him forever. I've known him since like the mid-1980s when he was programming at Cornell Cinema, because I grew up in Ithaca. I'm from Ithaca, New York. And so I met him there, and I actually curated a little New York. I was like very heavy into the New York independent downtown movie scene at the time, like Jim Jarmusch and people like that. And so I curated a little series for him at Cornell. And that was like in 1985 maybe, so it's a long time ago. I was young. And we stayed in touch ever since. And then he saw Strange Weather at Toronto and got in touch with me and said I loved the film and programmed it in Houston, which he does a series. He does a festival in Houston in the fall called Cinema Arts. And then he said I want to bring it to Ashland, and I was like, great. And as it turns out, one of my oldest friends is living in Ashland, and I haven't seen him in years. So I was like, this is like a win-win. And I've heard great things about Ashland, so yeah.
Cool. Well, we're glad you're here.
Oh, yeah.
I'm interested. You're a director and you're also a teacher, and I was wondering how those two things influence each other, because you're kind of like teaching kids how to like write, and then you're kind of like showing actors how to like be the characters that you're trying to bring to life. I was wondering if they kind of translate over.
Well, they're similar in that I think a good teacher and a good director, to do both those things well, you have to be a good listener, and you have to be a good, you have to have a beat on psychology. You know, teaching is, for me, is like figuring out who the student is. I ran into a former student of mine at one of the parties here yesterday as a short in the festival. He took my class twice a while ago. We were just like laughing about it because I used to be I'm really tough on them. I'm very tough on them. Tough but loving. But it's also figuring out who a person is and how to get from them the best they have to give, you know, whether it's as a writer or as an actor. Like, you have to understand, try to figure out what language you need to talk to people in, you know, because not everybody speaks the same language, and certainly with actors, you know, I talk to every actor differently, depending on who they are. And a lot of my work as both a teacher and as a director is getting to know the person in question so I can figure out the best way to talk to them, you know. And I can usually suss in a classroom, and I've taught long enough, I've taught for 15 years, I can figure out pretty quickly the personalities of the people in the room, and the ones who are going to be maybe a little difficult, and the ones that are going to need a lot of support, and, you know, it's pretty clear to me right away, and I'm rarely wrong about that. It's just like a vibe. And then I try to, you know, help the person find the work that they want to do.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just looked at the question and I forgot what it was.
You guys are very prepared.
Oh yes. So you I heard or read that you were planning on directing a film about a girl band.
Oh, the Shags. Yeah, that's my sadly long lost project. Oh my god, I tried to make that film for 12 years and almost made it multiple times, and each time like the money fell through, or one time Kirsten Dunst was going to do it. Then I had all these different actors attached to it. And the last time I was going to do it, I had Dakota and Elle Fanning possibly going to do it together. It was just like a heartbreaker, like just for various reasons. That happens with films. They just don't come together I still dream of making it. I mean, I might, like if I could get the rights back to the material, I might try to make it again, because I'm stubborn. But yeah, that was based on a true story about a band from the late 60s called the Shags, who were these girls, three daughters of a working class guy in New England, and they did not even really want to be in a band. And he like saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. It's like, my daughters are gonna be famous, and forced them to join a band. And they made this really weird, like almost outsider art, very dissonant record called Philosophy of the World, which is like a big cult record. But they like never wanted to be in a band, and that wasn't their thing. It was like their dad's dream. You know? It was really interesting material to look like.
That's so strange. You almost never hear about parents pushing creative influence on their kids. Like, you're gonna do a job that doesn't pay well, and like it's really hard to be in.
Right. And he put all his family savings into it, doing this record, and it was like he had this crazy dream. There's a really wonderful, if you have access to the New Yorker, there's a really great piece written about that band, which is how I started working on a project called Meet the Shags, and it's about the true story of. It's fascinating and disturbing.
Well, I would love to see that movie.
I would love to make that movie. I know. I mean, the script's just sitting there. Maybe I will. We'll see.
I think you should. I think that would be a really interesting story.
I worked on it for so long that now the people I auditioned over the years are like in their 30s. You know, it's like about teenagers now. Like they're like, I'm like, oh my god, I remember, and I have all of them like on videotape. That's how long ago it was on VHS tape auditioning. It's kind of crazy. Anyway,
I think it's interesting because like I feel like there was a period of time where acting in young people was kind of going down in quality, and I feel like it's coming back up again, which I'm really
there's
excited
a lot
about.
of really interesting young actors. Yeah.
I wrote questions now, I swear. I have a terrible memory.
It's okay if you don't ask them all too, Jake. It's okay if you don't
Do you
ask
want me
them
to
all.
stop?
No, you guys go until you want to stop, but I'm just telling you.
You're under no obligation to go through your whole list.
Yes.
Is what she said.
That's my teacher. She tells me what to do.
That's what she said it really lovingly. That's what teachers do. They draw careful, helpful boundaries, hopefully, in a nice
You know what
tone of voice.
language to talk to you in.
What?
We have to know what language
That's
to talk
right.
to
She knew what language to talk to you in.
So, I know you're a screenwriter and you're a director, and so obviously you have a passion for film. But I was wondering if you have any other art forms that you think are really special for examining the human condition.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I love photography, and I'm a photography fanatic. I mean, take photographs all the time. I always have, even before, you know, everybody had an iPhone, you could take a photograph really easily. I always shot, like with a Nikon point and shoot camera. So, I mean, I'm a huge fan of photography. My husband's a photography curator, and my daughter, who's almost 20, is a really amazing photographer. So, like, we just have it in the family, you know, that interest. And I think photographs, I mean, look at the photographs that just came out of Syria after that gassing. I mean, those photographs had such a huge impact. I mean, photographs still, even though we have like millions of images everywhere all the time, you know, a single photograph can have a tremendous, like earth-shattering effect on people still.
That would be an interesting subject to make a film about, of how actual photography
Yeah.
can be.
Yeah, it really can be. So yeah, I think photography more than anything else, probably outside of, you know, writing. Well, and music too. I mean, I love all the art forms. I don't discriminate, except maybe opera, which my family jammed down my throat when I was a child, and I still have an aversion to opera. I can't listen to opera.
I feel like I love writing and I love reading, but I've always found that I can never really imagine the characters that I read in books. Like I connect with them on like a very deep level, but I can never really see them as human, like as human as real people. You know?
Right.
Because when you see someone in real life or when you see them on the screen, I think it's easier to like be like, oh yeah, that's a real human being, you know?
Well, it's an interesting exercise. I mean, if you want to learn to be a screenwriter, you should just adapt a short story that you like, and just try adapting it and see like how do you figure out how to write that kind of a character in a different form. It's a good exercise, I think. Cool. That's something you like to do.
Sometimes I'm just reading a book and I'm like, hold on, if that was a real person, they would never say that.
But you can
Like,
get away. You can get away with stuff, and that's what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
fiction. You can get away with stuff that you cannot get away with in film. It's just a different set of rules. That's why books are wonderful too. That's true. Because they have different, they have different rules.
Well, those are my questions. So.
Okay.
So much.
No, my
Yeah.
pleasure. I always like to see young women who have like good minds. So that's what makes me happy. You guys should pursue. What do you want to do? What do you think? I mean, like I knew in high school what I wanted to do. I absolutely did not. I thought I wanted to be a sociologist when I was in high school. So.
I'm kind of. My mom and both of her sisters are psychotherapists.
Interesting.
And I find that very, very interesting. So I'm thinking about, but I also love writing and reading.
Yeah.
So
Go get a good liberal arts education. That's what I would say. Right. That's. I mean, I say that to all my students, and like, you know, at Columbia. I mean, I teach in the grad school. I don't teach undergrad, but like when I'm doing admissions and stuff, I'm so not interested in people who just like only studied film undergrad and want to go right into grad school. I'm like, what are your other interests? Like, do you know history? Do you have like, I mean, the more you can kind of develop your base of ideas,
Right.
I think the better writer you'll be, as opposed to like, I'm just gonna follow this track, you know, because all these other things feed writing, you know. And so I don't know. I mean, I wish I could go back to college again. And have like my daughter tells me the courses she's taking. She's at Barnard, and I'm like so jealous. I'm like, I want to take that course about literature, about walking. Why can't I take that class? You know, it's luxurious.
It's scary. I'm gonna be a senior next year, and it's just kind of weird.
What are you thinking about? Are you looking at schools?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna go to school here
Mhm.
at SOU for either just 2 years or get my full bachelor's. But I really don't know where I'm going with because I have all these different interests that kind of push.
But that's
on
why you
me.
go to college. You figure it out. You don't have to know in high school what you're doing.
Yeah, but I definitely know I want to study writing, and I love animation, so
Oh, cool.
I probably want to be a writer for animation.
That's a good
And
field to go into
I like
because there's a lot of work there.
But it's all that art style that I just love it. I'll geek out for hours about the art style. I'm like, do you see how they drew that line so that his eyebrow went down a little bit? I'm like, Jade, please stop.
Animation is great. Jennifer Lee, who did Frozen, came through our program. Really called me from school. Yeah, she's she's on fire now. So, anyway, you'll be fine. You'll figure out your path. Don't stress.